Welcome back to the AQS studio. Today we're going to be doing lesson 4 of the Quilting with Triangles class. And I know you had some fun doing some trimming because I trimmed all of my blocks too since our last lesson. And today we're going to lay those blocks out and sew the blocks together. You should have 2 pages in today's handout, and I've laid out all of the blocks according to this diagram. So you can do it row by row all the way across. And you know, we have 2 different colors in the corners of 2 blocks. 2 are the gold and green or the gold and red. And in my case, I have gold and teal and the gold and blue. And so 2 blocks will be each of those color schemes in that one corner. All right, so I've laid out all my blocks, and you want to make sure that when you're doing that, the easiest way to lay them out is to pay attention where the dark corners go. So when you look at this laid out, and you know I told you I like this mat, and you can see how I can lay my whole block out on this mat and carry it right over to where my sewing machine is. So the mat makes a good background to be able to lay them out, and now I'm ready to start sewing them together. But before we do that, we're going to have a short word from our sponsors.
You know, it's never been proven, but we all know that the floor gets 2 inches farther away every year on your birthday. We can help you out with that. You need a design wall. Check us out at offthewallquilt.com.
Scissorman here, founder of Fomori Cutlery. Chances are, if you're watching this, you're a needle artist. And needle artists like yourself from around the world have trusted the Fomori brand as their preferred cutting instruments for the past 20 years. To learn more, go to famcut.com.
Now the only other thing that we need to be able to sew our blocks together today is we do need a few pins. And I'm going to show you how to chain piece this quilt all together, so that when we end up, the whole block will all be connected and there's no chance of us turning any of those pieces around, or even a row around, which sometimes happens too. So I'm going to start by turning row 2 over on to row 1. We'll line those up. And I put 1 pin in. Okay, we're going to take the next one. We're going to do this whole row. We row 2 over on row 1. I'm just going to lay that on top. Row 2 on row 1. The reason I use a pin here is because it's real easy to pick this up and turn it around and sew on the wrong edge. And so if you methodically do it like I'm doing it, lay row 2 over on row 1, and that edge where they join is where you're going to put your pin. Okay, now I can take all 5 of those blocks and bring them over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to start in the top row, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I have my sewing machine set up so that I'm just doing a normal piecing stitch. I have the needle down in the needle down position so that as we move along, it will all stay connected. Okay, now, this next part is the secret to the whole thing of chain piecing. We'll get rid of my thread saver here. Because now I'm going to lay these two blocks in every row out. And it's really important that you do this. And you notice I don't do any pressing in between. All right, now we're going to take row 3 and lay it on row 1. And again, we're going to put a pin on the side that we're going to sew. Pick up row 3 and put it on row 2. Okay, now I'm ready to take that whole thing to the sewing machine, and you'll see why it's really important for us to have that pin in there, because you see how it's going to twist, and you just need to make sure that you have row 1 and 2 open. And I will, when I get to the sewing machine, I will just make sure that I've adjusted and made sure my squares are lined up. Okay, here's the next row. Here's my next pin. Make sure you open up rows 1 and 2. It's real easy to catch that in there if you don't do that. Okay, so I will take this out and we'll take it to the wall over here, and Again, we'll lay it out. And I'll go ahead and pin on the next row while you have a word with our sponsors.
I'm Amanda Murphy, and I'm a quilt and pattern designer. The Bernina Q16 is quilting magic. One of the hallmarks of a great quilting experience is when you lose yourself in your work.
Bernina, made to create.
Okay, so while you were gone, I sewed row 4 onto the other 3 rows. So again, I'm going to lay my quilt block out, and I'm going to add row 4 and put a pin in the edge we're going to sew on. Okay, we're ready to sew the last block onto this. And again, I will, while I'm at the machine, I will make adjustments to make sure that we have the corners of our squares. And the benefit of us doing all that trimming is that we can really line up the squares and we know that they're going to be the right size. Okay, here is the benefit of doing chain piecing. Is our entire block is all sewn together in rows and it's all connected so that all we have to do now is to sew the rows together. Before we do that though, we're going to do a little pressing. We're going to take another word from our sponsors, and when we come back, I'll show you how we press this particular block.
Trust the quality of Coats & Clark threads for all your quilting needs. With over 200 years of commitment to quality, selection, and innovation, Coats & Clark is the thread company trusted for generations. Tracy's Tables has all of your custom sewing table needs. Visit tracystables.com to see the complete line of unique tables, carts, and shelves. And all of Tracy's Tables are made in the USA.
All right, we're ready to press our block, and I've laid it out here on a wool pressing mat, but you would do the same thing if you were going to use your ironing board. And so I'm going to start at the bottom row, and I'm going to press all of the seams to the left. And again, you know, when we press, we just really let the iron do the work, let the heat of the iron do the work for us. So we don't have to have seesaw motions at all. All right, now that I've done the first row, I want to press the next row the opposite direction. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slide the row I just pressed right off the edge of my ironing mat. I already see that I've twisted one of the seam allowances there. We're going to get that in order so that it'll be right where we need it. So now I'm going to press the other direction for the next row. And do you see how this gives your iron complete access to the seam allowances that you need to make sure you keep them nice and flat? All right, so that takes care of that one. Now we're going to pull it one more time. And we can press the next row in the opposite direction. And you see that I'm kind of just tugging on this, and I'm doing that so that we don't get any pleats on the back side. Pull it off the edge. We just have one more row to do, and it's going to go the opposite direction. Okay, and so now to sew this together, because our seam allowances are going in opposing directions, so you can see this seam allowance goes this way, that one goes that way, and that's going to happen on every strip. All right, so now we're back and we're going to show you how to use the positioning pin to sew the rows together. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin in here in the top, right where that seam comes together. And now I'm going to go to the next row, and I'm going to look for that same seam. Okay, right where it comes together. Now, the reason this is called a positioning pin is all it's doing is staying straight up and down to hold the fabric together. All right? So then what we'll do is we'll come back and we will put a pin on either side of that. So this will be our second pin, and you want to take as small a bite as you can with your pin, because when you take this pin and you put it in your fabric and you twist, if you didn't have that positioning pin, it would actually move that fabric forward on the bottom. So we're going to put just, all right, one there, And again, I'm holding that positioning pin straight up and down. And we're going to put one on the other side. And now I can pull that positioning pin out. And we'll do that all along the way here. Now, if some of you are used to nesting your seams, I'm going to show you how to do the next seam where we nest it and don't necessarily have to pin it. If you are a new quilter, I would encourage you to use some pins. And if you're more experienced, you might want to try the nesting method. So I'm going to bring this over to the sewing machine, get it lined up for our seam allowance. Now, one thing I never do is I never sew over pins, so I'll sew right up to the pin, and I'm going to pull out the first pin and the second pin. All right, so now I'm going to get ready to nest this next seam. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the bottom one forward and lay the second one, the top, on top. And now with my finger, do you see how I'm using my finger right here? I'm using that finger to pull that bottom one right into the seam allowance of the other one. And so now I'm going to use my fingers as a pin. Again, we're going to nest. I'm going to push the bottom forward. And do you see how I pulled that so it snugged right in there? And hang on to it until you can't hang on to it anymore. Again, I'm going to push the bottom forward. And now I'm going to pull it until it nests with the seam allowance on the top. Okay, so now here comes the test. We're going to open it up, and what we want is for our seams to align perfectly. And so you can see I've showed you two different ways to do that. I've showed you how to do it with the positioning pin. If you have to use pins, there's nothing wrong with that. Go ahead and use them. But you'll save yourself a lot of time if you learn how to nest those seam allowances, and it all starts with pressing the seams in the opposite directions on each row. Now, I will tell you, you know, we have the corners of two blocks are one color, and the center corner of the other two blocks are the other corners. I will tell you that when you get ready to press those, if you will press those opposite of what you've pressed these, all of your seams will align when you sew block to block. So on the first one, I started with the bottom of it going to the left. And so on the other color scheme, this is my one with the teal in the corner. So when I do the two blocks that have the blue in the corner, I will do that bottom row going to the right instead of to the left. And so that's how you think and kind of prepare ahead of how you want to nest those seams. So I'm going to sit here and sew, and I'll sew the rest of this block together, and I'll be back with you in just a minute. We'll wrap up this class. All right, so our block is all done now. I've sewn all 5 rows together. And so now we're going to press the seams again. And this is where on the 2 that have the teal, I'm going to press them one direction, and the 2 that have the other color, if yours is either red or blue, we'll press those in the opposite direction of these 2, and that'll make joining them together in the center a lot easier. Again, this is a spot where you want to let the heat of the iron do the work. Sometimes we work too hard trying to do our pressing, and the heat of the iron is really what's going to do it. You'll find that sometimes you will have messed up a few seam allowances on the back, and a little shot of steam will take care of those. Now I see something on this block, and you might have this happen too, but you see how my thread, I kind of caught that wrong right there? If you'll just take your scissors and just do a little clip into the seam allowance, but not all the way through, we can get that to lay flat again. All right, so now I've pressed it good from the back side. I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to press it good from the other side. And so this is the point where you'll be looking to see, did you have any spots where they didn't match up very well? I see one little spot right here where I didn't match it very well. And so you'll have to decide, do you want to take that out or don't you want to take that out? And my philosophy is, unless it's really, really bad, nobody else is going to see that except for you. So we have one block all sewn together. We have 3 more to sew, and you know how to press them in opposite directions now. And again, if I were, this is the one that has the teal in the corner. My other ones have blue. If I press this one down, then I would press the other one up, and then you'll be able to nest those seams real easily and you won't have a lot of bulk. So for next time, we will look forward to having you join us again, and we will sew our blocks together, and we'll put some borders on this quilt. And our quilt top will be all finished when we get done with next week's lesson. Before you go though, I want to make sure that you go to quiltweek.com/letsquilt, scroll down to the register button, and register for all of those wonderful prizes that our sponsors are giving. 19 lucky winners are going to win some things from this show. So get your sewing machine busy, sew these blocks together, and we'll see you next week.